You ever notice how the most important decisions are never clean, never polite, never approved by everyone in the room? People like to pretend destiny arrives with permission slips and applause, but it doesn't. It arrives messy, shaking, breathing hard, stepping over the expectations of everyone who thought they owned someone's future. Somewhere right now, a door closed behind a person who didn't know how to explain what they felt, only that staying would slowly erase them. Tears were left behind, not because love was missing, but because courage rarely looked kind to the people watching it happen. True connection doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't knock politely or send an invitation to sit down and consider the consequences. It arrives suddenly, unannounced, with the weight of inevitability that makes every other relationship feel like a rehearsal, like a background noise you've been pretending to hear, while the real music played in a room you weren't allowed to enter. And that's the cruelty and beauty of it. It's never convenient, it's never quiet, and it doesn't care about timing or propriety. Timing is a human invention. True connection doesn't wait. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't ask, is this the right moment? It shows up and shakes the foundations you've built your life upon, and suddenly every rule you thought mattered collapses under the simple pressure of recognition. You can try to ignore it. You can try to dismiss as infatuation, as a passing impulse, as something that will fade with a night of sleep or a week of distraction. But true connection is patient in its persistence. It waits for you to see it, for you to feel it, for you to understand that nothing in your careful planning or your routine or your loyalty to the familiar can contain it. It doesn't scream. It doesn't storm in with drama. It just exists, quietly reshaping your reality, and if you're honest, it frightens you more than anything else ever could, because it reveals the truth you've been denying. You were never truly living until you recognized it. This kind of connection demands clarity you weren't ready for. It forces you to look at yourself in ways that hurt, in ways that are beautiful, in ways that make your stomach twist and your mind race. It doesn't just highlight the other person. It highlights the cracks in you, the compromise you've been making, the corners you've been cutting, the truths you've been avoiding. It exposes the lies you've told yourself about what love is, what loyalty is, what sacrifice is. And suddenly, the line between right and wrong becomes hazy, because life has handed you a reality that doesn't fit neatly into the boxes you've been trying to keep closed. True connection asks for choice. But choice feels impossible in the moment because the heart doesn't negotiate with logic. It doesn't weigh pros and cons. It doesn't calculate who gets hurt or who benefits. It just is. And when it appears, the world around you starts to unravel. People, situations, circumstances that once felt stable start to wobble, start to crack, start to scream for attention in ways you've never noticed. You suddenly understand the old saying that love is messy because it doesn't just touch you lightly. It rearranges everything it touches. And sometimes the first victims of that rearrangement aren't strangers. They're the people who were supposed to feel safe. The ones you and your soulmate both held close. The ones whose tears mark the cost of choosing reality over expectation. And that cost is unavoidable. True connection never asks you to harm. It never demands cruelty, but it does demand honesty. It does demand action. It does demand the courage to see yourself as you are, and the other person as they are, even when the consequences terrify you. And when your soulmate acts on that connection, when they choose authenticity over convenience, you feel it like an earthquake. Houses of familiarity collapse. Relationships tremble. Tears flow from hearts unprepared for the upheaval. And yet, the connection doesn't waver. It doesn't apologize. It doesn't retreat. It simply persists, pulling you toward the same inevitability your soulmate has already accepted. You can watch it happen, and you can scream in frustration, or you can marvel at the audacity of love that refuses to compromise itself for comfort. You can curse the chaos it creates, or you can recognize that chaos for what it is, a crucible, a test, a truth too powerful to be ignored. Tears may fall, bonds may strain, and the world may shake. But true connection doesn't bow to the easy path. It moves forward because it cannot do otherwise, because it has no choice, even when every human convention tells it to pause, to hesitate, to weigh loyalty above instinct. And in that there is a wild, terrifying beauty that is impossible to unsee once it's been revealed. It's never subtle, it's never polite, it's never convenient, but it is real. And in the reality of that connection, the universe suddenly makes sense in ways it never did when you were content with comfort and predictability, when you were content with safety and obedience. It doesn't ask for forgiveness from the world, because the world doesn't matter. It only asks for courage from those it touches. And when that courage manifests, when someone finally acts on what they cannot ignore, the ripples are unavoidable, the consequences inescapable, and the truth undeniable of doesn't send invitation. It doesn't care about anniversaries, birthdays, holidays, or the carefully constructed expectations of society. It arrives when it pleases, in moments that are inconvenient. Inconvenient to everyone. Inconvenient to yourself. Inconvenient to the people who thought they had a map for your life. And when it arrives, it doesn't negotiate. It doesn't ask, is this the right moment? It only exists, and that existence demands recognition, attention, and honesty whether you're ready or not. That's the cruel thing about love. It chooses its timing, and when it chooses, the world has no choice but to rearrange itself around it. You can pretend it's infatuation. You can tell yourself it's a fleeting feeling, a passing shadow, a trick of the mind. But the truth knows better, doesn't it? That quiet insistence, that gravity pulling at your chest, the awareness that won't leave you alone, that's not a coincidence. That's not temporary. That's something that refuses to be denied, something that persists despite logic, despite fear, despite the consequences waiting patiently in the wings. Love isn't patient in its absence. It's patient in its persistence. And when it persists, every familiar structure you've leaned on begins to crumble. This kind of love doesn't just touch the two people involved. It ripples outward, shaking everyone connected, even those who think they're safe from it. Families, friends, routines, expectations, all of it starts to wobble under the weight of truth. The people who loved you, the people who relied on your predictable choice, suddenly feel the tremors of a decision they never had a say in. And tears aren't always a sign of betrayal. They're the proof that the impact is real. That love, in its unrelenting honesty, can't be contained by convenience or tradition. It demands courage, action, and the willingness to embrace chaos as part of its package. People say love is selfless, but true love isn't simple sacrifice. It's messy, it's painful, it's inconvenient. It forces you to confront yourself in ways you've avoided. It makes you see the compromises you've been making quietly in the dark, the corner. You've been cutting in your own life to maintain the illusion of stability. It exposes the truth of who you are, what you want, what you've been avoiding saying out loud even to yourself. And that exposure is terrifying because it doesn't come with apologies or guarantees. It comes with clarity, raw and unflinching. And that clarity often hurts, as much as it enlightens. You watch the person you care about step forward, following the pull of their heart, and you feel the earthquake of it all. Families may be in tears, friends may gasp, society may shake its head, and yet, the person moving through that chaos does not falter. They are unflinching because they cannot deny the truth of what they feel. That is the power and terror of love that refuses to be polite or convenient. It doesn't ask anyone for approval. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't seek validation. It simply acts according to what is undeniable. And that's why it's so uncomfortable to witness. Because the ripples reach everyone around them. The ones who thought their place in the story was permanent are reminded that nothing is permanent but choice. That loyalty, while noble, can never replace authenticity. That love, when real, is willing to challenge every assumption, to tear down every structure, and to demand honesty. Even if that honesty arrives drenched in tears. The world doesn't collapse because of love. It collapses because people insist on pretending that it doesn't exist until it breaks through anyway. Tears flow and chaos erupts, but the truth remains. Love isn't waiting for permission from anyone to exist. It doesn't consult boards, families, or the calendar. It moves with intention, with persistence, with a kind of brutal patience that refuses to be ignored. And in that moment, every choice is exposed. Every hesitation is illuminated. Every comfort zone is shattered. The path forward is visible not because it's easy, but because it's unavoidable. The courage to follow it isn't optional. It's demanded by the sheer presence of the feeling itself. And what's most terrifying is that you cannot unsee it once it manifests. The moment someone acts on the undeniable force of connection, you're forced to reckon with the chaos they leave behind. You cannot ignore it. You cannot pretend it didn't happen. It forces reflection, confrontation, and recognition. And even those who cry in the aftermath know, deep down, that the tears are not only for loss. They are for the power of a love that refuses to compromise itself, for convenience that refuses to yield to expectation, that refuses to settle for anything less than what it is meant to be. Courage is a strange thing. Most people think it's loud, visible, celebrated, something that arrives in the form of applause or recognition. But real courage is quiet, and it's devastating, and it often arrives without warning. It doesn't check with anyone before it moves. It doesn't seek permission. It doesn't ask if the timing is convenient or if the cost will be comfortable. Courage is messy, and it refuses compromise. And when someone exercises it, especially in matters of the heart, it doesn't just change their life, it shatters the illusions of everyone around them. That's the problem with courage. It's contagious, and it exposes everyone who refuses to acknowledge it. You can see it in small gestures at first. A tone of voice that doesn't apologize for honesty. A step that doesn't hesitate even when the consequences are obvious. A decision made despite the fear of what others might think or feel. Courage doesn't require drama. In fact, the most terrifying acts of courage often go unnoticed until you realize their impact. And when someone you care about displays that courage, it's impossible to look away, impossible to pretend you don't feel the ripple it creates. It forces you to examine your own compromises, your own hesitation, your own willingness to remain small when the stakes are real. And stakes are always real when love is involved. Love isn't comfortable. Love isn't predictable. Love doesn't wait for the world to give its approval. True love demands honesty, demands movement, demands action. And when courage meets love, the result is disruptive. Families are shaken, friendships tremble, routines shatter, and tears flow like they were always meant to. Those tears aren't just from grief, they're from witnessing the audacity of someone choosing themselves and their truth over everything else. Choosing authenticity over convenience, choosing passion over complacency, choosing love over approval. People often confuse courage with recklessness, especially when it upends the expectations of others. They call it selfish, dramatic, irresponsible, as if following your heart is a crime punishable by social disapproval. But that's the misunderstanding. Courage doesn't operate within the bounds of comfort or tradition. Courage breaks through them. It refuses the polite chains society tries to place on people. It forces consequences into reality and forces reflection into hearts that had been too distracted to think honestly before. The courageous choice doesn't ask permission, it asserts itself, undeniable and unstoppable. And that's why it's terrifying to witness someone act on it, because it forces everyone else to face the truth of their own lives. If someone else can step forward, if someone else can take the leap despite the cost, then what excuses are left for those who remain in place? That's the insidious power of courage. It doesn't just change one life. It exposes every life that refuses to evolve alongside it. It forces questions that cannot be ignored. Questions about loyalty, about authenticity, about the sacrifices you're willing to make to honor the truth of your own desires. The tears, the shock, the chaos, they are not the consequence of courage. They are the evidence of resistance. They mark the moment when someone else's bravery reveals the weakness of those clinging to comfort, fear, to avoidance. Courage is impartial. It doesn't care who feels threatened by it. It moves forward regardless. And in doing so, it compels recognition. And recognition is dangerous. Dangerous because it awakens dormant desires. Dangerous because it exposes old compromises. dangerous because it forces the question, if they can't do it, why can't I? Courage isn't celebrated when it arrives quietly, and sometimes the only response it receives is tears from those who love the life that's being disrupted. But the tears are not condemnation. They are the sound of reality colliding with expectation, of truth pressing against convenience, of love demanding more than anyone was prepared to give. Courage doesn't soften the blow. It doesn't sugarcoat the consequences. It just insists that the right choice be made, regardless of who cries, who objects, who shakes, who falls. That insistence is frightening because it cannot be bargained with or ignored. And when someone you care about exercises that courage, it changes the landscape of your world. It forces you to reconsider everything you thought you knew about loyalty, about comfort, about fairness, about love itself. It makes the safe spaces uncomfortable, the familiar unbearable, and the excuses you've clung to for years meaningless. Courage doesn't just move people forward. It redefines the entire arena in which life unfolds. And it does so without asking anyone's permission. Witnessing courage is an awakening, a reckoning, a confrontation with the truth you've been avoiding. It's messy, it's painful, and it's electrifying because the world you thought you controlled suddenly feels smaller, weaker, less important than the force you've just seen in motion. And the most unsettling part is that it doesn't stop with the person being courageous. It spreads. It forces reflection. It demands self-examination. It awakens desire. It provokes change. And the realization that courage doesn't wait for comfort, that it doesn't negotiate, that it doesn't apologize, that it moves relentlessly toward truth, is the part that stays with you, lingering in the silence after the chaos, whispering that the choice to act is always yours. Even if it terrifies you, consequences are heavier than people admit. They don't arrive politely. They don't knock on your door with an explanation or a schedule. They arrive suddenly, without warning, wrapped in moments that feel unavoidable, moments where the impact hits before your brain has time to process what's happening. And the weight of consequences isn't always obvious immediately. Sometimes it creeps up quietly, a subtle shift in tone, a tear that wasn't there before. A silence that suddenly carries more meaning than any words ever could. And that's the cruelty of real consequences. They are impartial. They don't care if you intended well, if you tried your best, if you thought you were doing the right thing. They exist as proof that every choice matters, that every decision echoes in ways you may never fully control. When someone follows their heart, the consequences spread wider than anyone expects. It isn't contained within the lives of those acting. It ripples outward, touching people who thought they were safe from disruption. Families, friends, routines, expectations, all of it shakes, wobbles, fractures. The ones who cry aren't weak. They are witnesses, forced to confront the fact that the world is bigger, more unpredictable, and more complicated than they were willing to believe. And the person taking the leap, they feel the weight too, not as regret, but as awareness. They know every tear, every tremble, every gasp is part of the path they chose, and yet the choice remains inevitable. They cannot unchoose the truth that demanded action. Consequences don't care about comfort. They are indifferent to nostalgia, to convenience, to what feels safe. They arrive because action has meaning. They arrive because choices matter. And when courage and love collide, when someone chooses authenticity over familiarity, the consequences are unavoidable, inevitable, and immediate. People around them may feel betrayal, loss, anger, fear, but the person acting knows that the alternative, denying their own truth, would carry a deeper, quieter, unrelenting pain. Living in denial is slow, suffocating death. Whereas facing the consequences of honesty is brutal, quick, undeniable life. Most people don't like thinking about the consequences of others' courage. It's uncomfortable because it exposes their own compromises. It exposes how many times they've settled for convenience, for quiet, for the illusion of control. Witnessing someone else accept the weight of their choices forces reflection. How many moments have I avoided because I feared the ripple? How many chances have I ignored because the pain seemed too large? How often have I clung to stability at the expense of truth? Consequences are teachers, they are mirrors. They are reminders that life is not a rehearsal and that the fallout from our choices is not optional. And yet, the ones who act despite the potential consequences often move with clarity that the observers cannot comprehend. They understand that the discomfort, the tears, the disruption are not punishment. They are proof that life responds to action, proof that love refuses to be polite, proof that courage has a cost, and that cost is sometimes chaos, sometimes heartbreak, sometimes the shattering of everything people thought would remain intact. The beauty of this chaos is that it is honest. It doesn't bend to expectation. It doesn't negotiate with fear. It doesn't pretend that comfort is a worthy trade for truth. It moves relentlessly toward reality. Tears do not always signify the wrong path. They signify awareness. They signify recognition of power, of truth, of choice. They signify that what once seemed permanent, sacred, or untouchable has been rearranged by honesty. The person acting sees the ripples, and they move knowing the weight of what will happen. And the people crying, they move as well, whether they like it or not, because witnessing truth forces reckoning. It forces adaptation. It forces reflection. And reflection is heavier than fear, heavier than anger, heavier than anything comfort could contain. It sits in the chest, quiet, unrelenting, waiting for acknowledgement. Consequences cannot be outrun. They are impartial, persistent, patient, and absolute. They follow every choice, every action, every word spoken or withheld. And when someone exercises courage, when someone follows love despite what it will cost, the consequences arrive in full force. They may arrive as heartbreak, as tears, as disruption, as disbelief. But they are honest. And honesty, though it terrifies, though it breaks and shakes, though it cannot be controlled, is the only force capable of creating real change. And the awareness of that change lingers in the silence afterward, lingering in the eyes of those who cried, lingering in the chest of those who acted, lingering in the world that must now adjust to the truth that no one involved can ignore. Authenticity doesn't apologize. It doesn't whisper politely or wait for approval. It shows up raw, unfiltered, untamed, and it doesn't care who it hurts along the way, because its first loyalty is to the truth of itself. People mistake authenticity for cruelty, for recklessness, for selfishness, but that's misunderstanding the power it carries. Authenticity doesn't exist to be convenient. It doesn't negotiate with comfort or expectation. It arrives and it demands recognition, action, acknowledgement, whether anyone around it is ready or not. That's the terrifying beauty of it. It doesn't bend. It doesn't hide. It doesn't wait for everyone else to catch up. You see it in the decisions people make when they can no longer deny the pull of who they are. It's in the way someone steps forward, ignoring the disapproval or confusion of the world around them. It's in the choices that don't follow the rules of tradition, family, or obligation. It's in the courage to follow the heart even when the consequences are messy, painful, undeniable. Authenticity doesn't sugarcoat. It doesn't tiptoe. It demands clarity in a way that shakes every comfort zone it touches. And when someone finally acts on it, the ripples reach far beyond them, unsettling lies, exposing truths, breaking illusions that everyone else thought were safe. Authenticity is heavier than people expect. It carries with it consequences, sometimes immediate, sometimes slow burning, and it doesn't care who feels the weight first. Families cry. Friends are shocked, routines crumble, expectations shatter, and yet the person acting knows deep down that the chaos is not punishment. It is evidence. Evidence that truth exists in action, that courage manifests in reality, and that living a life disconnected from authenticity is a far heavier burden. You know what's funny about signs? People beg for them, chase them, demand them, and when one finally shows up, they suddenly act surprised. Like they didn't ask for this moment with their whole soul. You've been bargaining in silence, haven't you? Quiet prayers at night, half belief during the day, telling yourself you just need one more push, one more confirmation, one more reason to stop hesitating. And now here you are, staring at a moment that feels heavier than coincidence, louder than chance, sharper than comfort. They always say faith is about patience, but but no one talks about how terrifying it is when the waiting ends and the responsibility begins. You know what happens when excuses finally run out? People panic, not because they don't know what to do, but because now they do. Confusion is comfortable. It gives you somewhere to hide. You can sit in it, decorate it with theories, tell yourself you're still figuring things out. But when a final sign shows up, confusion doesn't survive. It burns away, and what's left is raw, exposed truth staring you straight in the face. That's when excuses start screaming, because excuses only live where uncertainty still exists. For a long time, you told yourself you were waiting for clarity. You said you just needed one more signal, one more push, one more reason to move. Funny thing is, you weren't waiting for clarity at all. You were waiting for an excuse that felt noble, something you could point to and say, see, I had no choice. But this moment doesn't let you play that game anymore. It doesn't give you room to misunderstand it. It doesn't whisper softly enough to be ignored. It shows up solid, undeniable, heavy enough to sit on your chest and make it hard to breathe. A final sign doesn't confuse you. It corners you. It removes the fog you've been hiding in and turns the lights all the way up. And suddenly, all those reasons you collected over the years start to look like what they always were: delayed, dressed up as logic, fear wearing intelligence, comfort pretending to be patience. You weren't lost. You were stalling, and now there's nowhere left to stall without admitting that's exactly what you're doing. People love to say they're overwhelmed when the truth finally shows up. Overwhelmed sounds better than exposed. Overwhelmed sounds like something happened to you instead of something you avoided. But the truth is simple and brutal. The moment you asked for a sign, you unknowingly agreed to be held accountable when it arrived. And now that it's here, you don't get to pretend you didn't see it. You don't get to say you didn't know. The final sign doesn't ask if you're ready. It just asks what you're going to do now. The pretending is off the table. Excuses thrive in maybes. Maybe later. Maybe when things calm down. Maybe when you feel more confident. Maybe when someone else changes first. But a final sign kills maybe. It turns everything into now. And now is terrifying, because now demands action without guarantees. Now doesn't promise comfort. Now doesn't offer applause. Now just hands you the truth and watches what you do with it. And here's the part people hate the most. When excuses die, responsibility takes their place. You can't blame timing anymore. You can't blame circumstances. You can't blame other people for not understanding you. The mirror is too clear. The message is too loud. And deep down, you feel it, that shift inside you where you realize the decision has already been made. Not by the world, by you. All that's left is whether you own it or keep running in circles, pretending you're still undecided. This is where people either level up or retreat into bitterness. Some will say the sign was too harsh, too sudden, too demanding. They'll complain it didn't arrive wrapped in comfort. But signs aren't meant to be gentle. They're meant to be honest, and honesty feels violent when you've been lying to yourself for a long time. This moment didn't come to destroy you. It came to strip you of the stories you used to stay small. You can feel it, can't you? That uncomfortable stillness where there's nothing left to analyze. No more questions to ask. No more angles to consider. Just a clear line between who you've been and who you keep saying you're going to become. The final sign doesn't push you across that line. It just shows you that the line has always been there, waiting for you to stop pacing back and forth and choose a side. And once you see that, once excuses lose their grip, there's no unseeing it. You can delay action, but you can't delay awareness. You can slow your steps, but you can't pretend the path disappeared. This is the moment where clarity replaces comfort, and the weight you feel isn't fear, it's ownership. Clarity doesn't arrive gently. It doesn't knock twice and wait for you to answer when you feel ready. It shows up when avoidance runs out of places to hide, when every familiar escape route collapses at the same time. That's the cruel joke about clarity. It waits until you've exhausted every excuse, every distraction, every carefully constructed delay. You think you're confused, but confusion was never the problem. Confusion was the shelter. It was the fog you wrapped yourself in so you wouldn't have to admit that deep down you already knew exactly what needed to change. Avoidance is clever. It wears productivity like a costume. It convinces you that staying busy is the same as moving forward. It tells you that overthinking is the same as being careful. And for a while, it works. You feel safe there, suspended between decision and denial. But clarity doesn't respect comfort. It waits until avoidance gets tired, until it can't hold the weight anymore. And then it snaps. Suddenly, the question you've been dodging doesn't feel complex at all. It feels obvious, embarrassingly obvious. You feel it when the noise inside your head goes quiet for the first time. No arguments, no debates, no endless pros, cons, just a single, steady awareness sitting in your chest, heavy and undeniable. That's clarity. Not loud, not dramatic, just firm. And the reason it scares you isn't because it's confusing, it's because it's simple. Simple enough that you can't intellectualize your way out of it anymore. Simple enough that any delay from this point forward becomes a decision in itself. People love to romanticize uncertainty. It sounds thoughtful, deep, philosophical. But most uncertainty is just fear wearing a smarter outfit. It's hesitation pretending to be wisdom. And once clarity arrives, that disguise falls apart. You see how many times you said, "I'm not sure yet," when what you really meant was, "I'm scared of what happens if I choose." Avoidance gives you plausible deniability. Clarity takes it away. And when avoidance runs out, it doesn't explode. It dissolves. One moment you're convincing yourself you still need time, and the next moment you realize time was never the issue. Courage was. Accountability was. The willingness to disappoint someone, including the version of yourself that's grown comfortable in the waiting. Clarity doesn't ask you to feel confident. It asks you to be honest. Honest about what you want. Honest about what's draining you. Honest about what you've outgrown, but keep revisiting because it's familiar. That's why clarity feels heavy, not because it adds pressure, but because it removes excuses. You can't say you didn't know anymore. You can't say you're still figuring it out. The fog lifts, and suddenly you see the road exactly as it is. No mystery, no magic, just direction. And direction is dangerous for someone who's been surviving on avoidance, because direction demands movement. You notice it in your body before your mind catches up. That tightness in your chest, that quiet urgency, that sense that something has expired. Avoidance thrives on endless options. Clarity narrows everything down to one uncomfortable truth. This can't continue the way it has. And whether you act on it or not, you've crossed a line just by seeing it. You can't go back to pretending the confusion was real. People often say they're afraid of making the wrong choice, but what they're really afraid of is losing the ability to avoid choosing at all, because as long as you're still thinking, you're not responsible yet. But clarity arrives when that excuse collapses. When you realize that not choosing is choosing. That staying still is an action. That waiting is a vote for the status quo. Avoidance runs on hope without commitment. Clarity replaces it with responsibility without comfort. It doesn't guarantee success. It doesn't promise relief. It just tells you the truth and steps back to watch what you do next. And that's the part that feels almost cruel, because the moment clarity arrives, the weight shifts from the universe to you. You asked for direction. You asked for understanding. You asked for a sign. And what you got wasn't fireworks or thunder, but the quiet collapse of every excuse you've been using to delay your own life. Avoidance ran out. Clarity took its place. And now there's nowhere left to hide except inaction or denial. And denial doesn't work the same once you've seen clearly fear is loud. It shakes you, rattles your thoughts, makes a mess so dramatic you almost respect it. Fear screams until you either run or freeze, and at least when fear is in the room, you know what you're dealing with. But the last warning, that thing is quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't chase. It just sits there, calm and patient, like it already knows how this ends. And that's why it feels heavier than fear. Fear wants your attention. The last warning already has your attention. It has your history. It has your patterns memorized. You've felt fear before. Everyone has. Fear before trying something new. Fear before losing someone. Fear before failing in public. Fear before admitting the truth. But fear always comes with adrenaline, with excuses, with a sense of chaos you can blame. The last warning doesn't give you that luxury. It doesn't rush your heartbeat. It slows it down. It presses on you in a way that makes everything feel still, like the world is holding its breath and watching to see if you finally understand what's happening. This is the moment people don't talk about. The moment after fear gets tired, after the threats stop working, after the same consequences repeat themselves enough times that they stop feeling like accidents. The last warning shows up when life has already tried being loud with you, when pain already knocked, when discomfort already escalated, and instead of another explosion, you get silence, a pause, a look. That's when it sinks in that this isn't about being scared anymore. This is about being done. Fear says, what if? The last warning says, this is it. Fear keeps the future blurry. The last warning sharpens it. You suddenly see exactly where this road leads if you don't change anything. No imagination required. No exaggeration. Just a clear, unromantic picture of consequences you've already tasted enough times to recognize. That's why it feels so heavy. There's no mystery left to hide behind. You notice it in the way you stop arguing with yourself. The inner debates fade. The justifications sound weak, even to you. You don't feel panicked. You feel exposed. Like something inside you finally got tired of pretending this situation is normal. The last warning doesn't feel dangerous. It feels final. And finality is terrifying in a way fear could never compete with. People think warnings are supposed to be dramatic. Sirens, explosions, emotional breakdowns. But the real last warning is subtle. It's the moment when repeating the same mistake starts to feel embarrassing instead of painful. When you catch yourself about to do the same thing again and something inside you says you already know how this ends. That's heavier than fear because fear still allows hope without change. The last warning demands change without hope. This is where denial usually makes its last stand. It tells you you're overthinking, that you can handle it a little longer, that it's not that serious yet, but the weight doesn't lift. It stays, because the warning isn't coming from outside anymore. It's coming from inside, from the part of you that's watched. You survive things you should have outgrown by now, from the part that's tired of cleaning up the same mess in different disguises. Fear makes you feel weak. The last warning makes you feel responsible. And responsibility is heavier than fear because you can't fight it or run from it. You will either carry it or it crushes you. There's no villain to blame, no sudden disaster to point at, just a quiet understanding that if this continues, it will be because you allowed it to. And that realization sits on your chest like gravity. The last warning doesn't beg you, it doesn't threaten you. It just removes your ability to lie to yourself comfortably. You can still ignore it, sure, but it won't feel innocent anymore. Every step forward without change will feel intentional. Every delay will feel like a choice instead of confusion. And that's the unbearable part. Fear lets you feel like a victim. The last warning hands you the mirror. This is the moment where people either evolve or harden. Some turn bitter, blaming the world for being unfair. Others finally move, not because they're brave, but because staying the same has become unbearable. The last warning isn't about danger, it's about dignity, about how much longer you're willing to watch yourself repeat a life you already know you're meant to leave behind. You don't feel like screaming. You don't feel like running. You feel still, heavy, awake, like something irreversible just clicked into place. Fear would have been easier. Fear would have given you noise, chaos, excuses. But this is quiet understanding. And once it settles in, it doesn't leave. It waits, patient, certain. Watching what you do now that you know this is the last time you'll be warned. Silence is comfortable when nothing is expected of you. It wraps around you like a thick curtain, dulls the noise, softens the pressure. You can sit inside it and pretend that things are still undecided, that nothing has been demanded yet. Silence lets you observe without committing, exist without choosing, survive without standing for anything. But the moment responsibility shows up, That silence cracks, not loudly, not dramatically. It fractures from the inside, like glass under pressure, and suddenly, every quiet thought you were hiding behind starts making noise. Responsibility doesn't announce itself with chaos. It arrives with clarity, and clarity is noisy in its own way. It forces questions you can't mute anymore. What are you doing? Why are you still here? How long are you going to pretend this isn't yours to carry? Silence can't survive those questions. It was built on avoidance, on distance, on the illusion that time would somehow make choices for you. Responsibility walks in and says time is done working for free. People confuse silence with peace. That's the trick. Silence feels calm, controlled, mature. It makes you feel like you're being patient, thoughtful, strategic. But most silence is just fear holding its breath. Fear of being seen. Fear of being blamed. Fear of finding out you're capable of more than you've been willing to admit. Responsibility doesn't let fear hide quietly. It drags it into the light, and suddenly your inner world gets loud. You hear it when you can't sleep the same way anymore, when distractions stop working, when the jokes don't land, even when no one else is around. The silence that once protected you starts to suffocate you, because now you know. You know something is required of you, not later, not someday, now. And once you know that, silence stops being neutral. It becomes a decision. And decisions echo. Responsibility doesn't care. If you feel ready, it doesn't negotiate with comfort. It doesn't wait for confidence to show up. It simply hands you the weight and watches how you adjust your posture. That's when the internal noise begins. Regret starts talking. Potential clears its throat. All the promises you made to yourself years ago start asking why they were abandoned. Silence can't hold all that. It breaks under the sound of your own awareness. People love quiet lives until they realize quiet doesn't mean fulfilled. It just means unchallenged. Responsibility challenges you by removing the mute button. Suddenly your thoughts have volume. Your excuses sound thin. Your reasons feel recycled. You notice patterns you used to ignore. You see how often you chose easy over honest. And every realization adds another layer of noise to a mind that used to feel so calm when it didn't have to answer to itself. This is where many people run back to noise on purpose. They drown responsibility in chaos. Busy schedules, loud opinions, constant movement. Anything to avoid the specific sound of accountability. Because responsibility isn't just loud, it's precise. It points directly at you, not society, not fate, not circumstances, you. And that kind of noise is unbearable if you've spent years hiding in silence. When responsibility begins, even other people start sounding different. Advice hits harder. Criticism sticks longer. Compliments feel heavier. Because now everything feels connected to what you do next. Silence used to let things pass through you. Responsibility makes everything land. Every word, every moment, every missed opportunity. The world hasn't gotten louder. You've just stopped insulating yourself from it. There's a strange honesty in this break. Silence breaking means denial is losing. It means you're waking up to the idea that your life isn't something happening to you anymore. It's something responding to you. And response creates sound. Choices create consequences. Awareness creates pressure. The quiet you miss wasn't peace. It was distance from your own power. You don't get that silence back once responsibility starts. You can try to ignore it, sure. You can pretend you didn't hear the crack, but it's already broken. The noise will follow you into every still moment, into every pause, into every decision you delay. Because responsibility doesn't shout once and leave. It keeps whispering, and whispers are harder to escape than screams. This is the point where people either mature or retreat. Maturity doesn't mean the noise stops. It means you stop fighting it. You learn to stand in it without flinching, to let responsibility speak without panicking, to accept that the silence you lost was never meant to last. It was just a waiting room. And now, your name has been called, and everything inside you is loud. Because it finally has something real to answer to and pretend. You don't hear it anymore would be the loudest lie of all. Comfort has an expiration date, but nobody reads the label. It feels so harmless while it's working, like a soft chair you sink into after telling yourself you deserve the rest. Comfort doesn't rush you. It doesn't demand explanations. It nods along while you repeat the same days, the same habits, the same excuses. And it whispers that stability is the same thing as safety. That's how it gets you. It never attacks. It slowly convinces you that this is all there is, and that wanting more is greedy, unrealistic, dangerous. Comfort doesn't disappear all at once. It spoils quietly. One day the routine that felt secure starts to feel dull. The silence you once enjoyed starts to itch. The habits that protected you begin to cage you. You still call it comfort, but it doesn't feel comforting anymore. It feels heavy. Stale, like air that's been breathed too many times. That's when people panic, because they don't realize comfort was never meant to last. It was meant to hold you temporarily, not house you permanently. Purpose doesn't show up while comfort is still in control. Purpose waits. It watches how long you're willing to stay numb. It knows you won't listen while everything feels fine. Purpose only speaks when comfort stops working, when the familiar starts to feel wrong. When the easy life begins to feel like a betrayal of something inside you that hasn't died yet. That discomfort you're trying to escape isn't punishment. It's an eviction notice. People love comfort because it doesn't ask questions. Purpose asks too many. Why are you still here? Why are you avoiding this? Why do you keep choosing relief over meaning? Comfort lets you forget those questions exist. Purpose drags them back into the room and makes them sit with you. And the cruel part is, you don't get to skip straight to purpose. You have to sit through the discomfort first. You have to feel the expiration. That's why people cling to comfort even when it hurts them. At least it's familiar pain. At least it's predictable. Purpose is unknown. Purpose threatens identity. Purpose doesn't promise happiness. It promises significance, and significance costs something. Comfort is cheap. It takes your potential as payment and calls it peace. You can tell comfort is expiring when distractions stop working, when scrolling feels empty, when jokes don't land, when sleep doesn't refresh you, when success without meaning tastes bland. That's not laziness. That's not depression. That's awareness breaking through the sedation. That's the moment comfort loses its grip, and you start feeling the hunger it was hiding. Purpose doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives with discomfort and a question mark. It arrives when you're tired of being entertained by your own life, when you realize you've been living on pause, waiting for motivation to appear instead of realizing discomfort is the invitation. Purpose doesn't show up to rescue you. It shows up to challenge you. It doesn't soothe. It sharpens. People say they want purpose, but what they really want is comfort with meaning attached. They want fulfillment without friction. They want destiny without sacrifice. That's not how it works. Purpose only becomes visible after comfort expires. After you stop asking how to stay safe and start asking what's worth the risk. That's when the fog lifts. Not because life gets easier, but because it finally gets honest. Comfort expiring feels like loss at first. You grieve it. You miss how easy it was not to care deeply, not to try fully, not to risk failure publicly. But what you're really mourning is the version of yourself that didn't have to grow. And growth always feels like danger to something that's been comfortable for too long. Purpose steps in when you stop trying to preserve who you were. When you accept that the old routine can't come with you. When you finally admit that staying comfortable is costing you more than leaving ever could. That's when direction appears, not as certainty, but as urgency. Not as answers, but as movement. Comfort tells you to sit down. Purpose tells you to stand up even when your legs shake. Comfort tells you to wait. Purpose tells you time has already been wasted. Comfort tells you you're fine. Purpose tells you you're capable of more, and that truth burns before it heals. If your comfort feels uncomfortable lately, that's not failure. That's timing. That's the moment before purpose enters. The moment when the old life stops fitting and the new one hasn't revealed itself yet. That space feels cruel, but it's honest. And once you recognize that comfort has expired, you can stop trying to revive it and start listening to what the discomfort has been trying to say all along.